Here we go then, this is mission start for Dueling Shashkas. Just in case I didn't make it clear in the last video, I am playing as the Russians here. Something else to point out is that there are a few mods on while I'm playing the game. There's the HQS sound mod, Kimi's high-res textures, and Bill Hardenberger's unit icon, so it looks quite a bit different from the base game if anybody's wondering why that is. My tanks are getting into position, and one of the first things we get is a fleeting glimpse of an enemy unit on the other side. A quick look shows that that's a BTR-4, which is a mechanised infantry fighting vehicle. Chances are that's what's going to be filling out the enemy's mechanised infantry platoons. I know that that's an amphibious vehicle and that it's got 30mm cannon and some anti-tank missiles, so I'll need to be taking that into account as I refine my planning. My own motor rifle platoons are rushing forwards. My right hand platoon is using the road through this wood to move, which lets them move nice and fast and at the same time stops the enemy from seeing them. The enemy is dropping some light artillery, probably some mortars, judging by the trajectory, over here to deploy some smoke. I couldn't think of anything effective to do with my own mortars, so they're on standby. And then we get a suspected tank spot just past the mortar smoke, and immediately we get a laser warning pop up on one of my T90s. That means that somebody is firing a laser rangefinder at it, which means it's probably about to get shot at. My tank straight away pops smoke to try and get out of the enemy's sight before they can get the shot off. At exactly the same time, the enemy tank spot resolves into this, which is a T-84 Oplot. This is very comparable to my T-90s, and as you can see, it started to pop smoke the instant my forces have seen it, and presumably lased it. Obviously, the enemy also has the same kind of laser warning receivers on his vehicles as well. It doesn't help here though, one of my T-90s at the back puts a hole straight through it at 1700 meters. Over in the woods, something misses my T-90. I can tell you that that was probably an anti-tank guided missile, which is either a laser riding version that got dazzled and thrown off course by the equipment on the T-90, or it was a wire guided missile that lost its wire in the trees. More spots are popping up. In the centre, there's an enemy BTR-4 platoon rushing down towards the river, which gets engaged and wrecked by one of my motor rifle platoons, which is doing exactly the same thing. One of my T-90s also sends a round in there. This shows off exactly how risky a move it is sending these vehicles through the fields like this. There's a tense moment as my BMP3s get lased. They're just as vulnerable to the BTR4s they just rinsed, and they're doing exactly the same thing. But they pop smoke and they get through okay. About the same time, one of my T-90s on the right gets spotted. The incoming round causes some spalling, which is to say it doesn't penetrate but causes fragments to break off the inside and zip about the fighting compartment. But I'm lucky, the crew of the vehicle are totally fine and it reverses out the way under the cover of the smoke. On the other flank, another T-90 spots and engages an enemy tank. A second later, there's a secondary explosion, and that is a confirmed kill. My right hand motor rifle platoon has reached the river. There are enemy tanks on top of the hill on the other side, but they can't see down to my BMP3s on the riverbank because of the angle of the slope, and my platoon can swim across the river in relative safety. Back to the left flank, one of my T-90s is taking some 30mm cannon fire from the opposite side of the river. Then it gets lased, pops smoke and reverses. The 30mm cannon fire didn't penetrate, though it's degraded some of the optics. There's a lot of comparatively fragile stuff on the outside of the tank. The laser warning receiver probably got set off by either another tank or one of the BTR-4s. I've had a quick check and those BTR-4s have laser riding anti-tank missiles, so that could also set off the receiver. Something I haven't mentioned yet is what my attached units are doing. Right now my sniper platoon is just getting out of their MTLB transport and occupying one of the objective buildings. My two ATGM teams are occupying another objective, the school, which has a nice flat roof for them to set up on. Both of these teams are mainly going to be spotting enemy units and just keeping a hold on these objectives. I've shuffled one of my T90s on the left flank so that it's covering the left rather than the centre. That way hopefully it's going to spot, engage and destroy the BTR4s I think are over there on the left flank, and very quickly that tank starts taking 30mm fire and engaging the targets it spots. This T90 is taking a serious hammering here. The 12.7mm AA machine gun on the roof of the turret gets torn off, it takes some damage to the outside subsystems, but none of that 30mm fire is penetrating the armour, while every shot that T90 sends out is going in the front of those BTR4s all the way through and out the back. Eventually we get the laser warning pop up again, the T90 pulls back. Another redeploying T90 on the left gets lased and the enemy round just skims over the top of the turret. I've been lucky again. My luck is bound to run out at some point, and out on the far left we get the dreaded laser warning, and then turret crew bail out, the driver doesn't. A closer look on the replay and we can see that that was an ATGM, probably from further up the left flank where that BTR4 platoon was. This left flank is starting to concern me a little bit. The enemy there is screened off from most of my forces by the woods, so I can only engage them from the front. I have to come into their field of fire to do it. And as we've seen, when I do that, the enemy can concentrate their firepower on one target and either destroy it or drive it off. In the meantime, more BTR4s try to get down to the river with the same results as the last two attempts. In the centre and on the right, my infantry are disembarking and moving into the town to seize objectives and take up defensive positions. The right hand motor rifle platoon's vehicles are splitting off and moving into this valley on the far right. I want to see if this area is going to be somewhere I can use to exploit, either immediately or later on when my reinforcements arrive. Over on the left again, I pushed up one of my spare BMP3s to see if we could get eyes on the river crossing down there. Now that both sides are in position, moving around in the open is a bad idea. At this point, there are a few cosmetic changes. The enemy spotted icons have changed to yellow warning triangles, which is much clearer, and the vehicles have some different camouflage. Three-tone camouflage for the Russians and digital camouflage for the Ukrainians. And as you can see, the tank sniping continues across the valley. I may have the upper hand here, but it could very easily be going the other way. As the smoke clears, targets are becoming visible again to both sides, and I'm the one who's being lucky enough to be getting the first rounds in. Over on the worrying left flank, enemy tanks are moving up. These spots were by my infantry in the town, who don't have the weaponry to do anything about it, but it's still really important for them to keep an eye on what's going on over there. We're up to about minute 7 here, and it's starting to look as though the enemy push has been blunted. Except for the left, nothing is trying to advance. And even on the left, things are starting to be less of a concern. That's another hit on an enemy tank. Something to remember is that even with these penetrating hits, I might not necessarily be getting kills on these enemy tanks. So there could be a lot more enemy tanks out there that are still in fighting condition. The same T90 gets spotted and lased again. It's out of smoke so it can't pop it, but it reverses. The incoming enemy round is a hit, but is apparently absorbed by the reactive armour. And that's very interesting. That means it wasn't an armour piercing shell. It was something else, something with a shaped charge warhead. Something I wasn't expecting was to see a BTR4 pop up here, along with some enemy infantry that it must have deployed. This is in the valley bottom, right on the edge of the town, and an important reminder that I don't have 100% coverage of the opposite valley side. Things can still slip past. My infantry is already set up in the buildings in the town, so I'm not too worried about the enemy troops, but that BTR-4 has to go. I've relocated a fire team with an RPG-7 to somewhere where they will hopefully be able to keyhole it. It's not to be though. The BTR-4 slinks off to follow its infantry and the fire team loses sight of it. It does, however, get spotted by one of the ATGM teams on the school roof, which engages it. You can see the enemy get the laser warning, react, pop smoke, but it's too late and it gets drilled. At the same time, the enemy infantry gets respotted, this time by one of my fire teams by the centre bridge, which immediately opens fire. The enemy soldier takes cover, fires off disposable RPG for some reason, but then has to go to ground under the weight of fire. My infantry also sees an enemy tank moving down on the left, and one of the enemy tanks on the crest in the centre pops back up. It's quickly engaged by a T-90, but the round misses. Just as it reverses off, the enemy tank fires an ATGM back at my T-90. The missile is spoofed and thrown off, or just plain misses. This explains why there are so many missiles flying around and why in that one instance my T-90 was saved by its reactive armour. I had no idea that those T-84s could fire anti-tank missiles, but now I know. The enemy tank is spotted reversing by another T-90, but it manages to get away before my tank can get a shot off. Meanwhile, in the town, the enemy infantry team is nicely pinned down. My troops are absolutely loaded with ammunition, and I'm not worried in the slightest about them going overboard with it. There may be other enemy infantry about, so I still need to be paying attention, but they're going to be coming to me, which should give me the advantage. One of my T-90s at the back takes a non-penetrating hit from something. You can see it there in between the barrel and the laser warning receiver, and this just goes to show that the enemy might be down, but he's still not out yet. Over on the far right, on the enemy side of the valley, I'm sending one of my BMP3s up the edge of the map, over the crest of the hill, because I have very little idea of what's over there. It gets a long way up the enemy flank, never gets lased, and never gets fired at. What I want to do now is tuck it into these woods and see if it can't keep an eye on what's going on over there. My reinforcements are going to be coming in on the next turn. We've been going for almost 10 minutes now. Where am I going to commit them when they arrive? If we look at the map, the enemy is focused on the centre and the left. The right looks pretty empty. This doesn't mean that it is empty. I might not be able to see into it very well, but what I've seen so far looks very promising. The enemy tanks that I've been dealing with so far, and which represent the main threat, are fairly spread out. They mostly look like they've been working in pairs, and while they can support each other like that to their fronts, because of the linear nature of the terrain up on their side of the valley, they aren't mutually supporting to their sides. All the enemy forces are looking at me across the valley, and in between them there are woods, buildings, terrain that stops them from seeing one another. So, based on that, what I'm planning to do with my reinforcements is push across the valley into that empty looking right flank, get up on the valley side, and then roll up the enemy elements from right to left, concentrating overwhelming force against each one and destroying them in detail one at a time. The T-90s I already have deployed on Overwatch should be able to stop the enemy redeploying. I can also assume that the enemy is going to be getting reinforcements at the same time as I am, given that the scenario has been fairly symmetrical so far. Those reinforcements are going to pop up somewhere across the valley where I can't see them. So I'm going to have to keep an eye on my flank while I'm trying to roll up the enemy line if I want to avoid some nasty surprises. Hopefully this is going to be the decisive blow that's going to clear the enemy out completely. And you're going to see how that goes in the next video.